Let the truth fly faster than their lies.
The misdelivered envelope changed everything. Milo Greavy stared at the court document addressed to Nathan Ellsworth, wondering why his wife's boss needed a divorce lawyer when everyone knew the guy had been single for 2 years. The paper felt heavier than the steel beams he welded 40 hours a week at Peterson Fabrication. October rain drummed against the kitchen window of their cramped duplex on Dalton Road. Leanne wouldn't be home for another hour. Milo set the envelope on the counter and walked to their shared tablet, the one they used for grocery lists and car maintenance reminders. His calloused fingers found the Google Maps history. Tuesday, 4:47 p.m., Riverside Hotel, downtown. Wednesday, 5:23 p.m., same location. Thursday, 4:52 p.m., same location again. Leanne had told him she was working late all 3 days. Her office was 12 miles in the opposite direction. Milo's hands didn't shake. They never did, not after 17 years of precision welding. But something cold settled in his chest as he memorized the hotel address and deleted the search history. He replaced the tablet exactly where he'd found it and walked to the garage. His old Ford pickup started on the second try. The suspension groaned as he backed out of the driveway, past the rusted mailbox with Greavy painted in fading letters. The courthouse envelope sat on the passenger seat like evidence waiting for a jury. Peterson Fabrication's night shift supervisor, Danny Torres, had called that morning with news that made Milo's jaw clench. Equipment failures. 3 separate incidents in 2 days. The hydraulic press that Milo had personally maintained for 6 years suddenly lost pressure. The cutting torch he'd used yesterday developed a mysterious gas leak. The overhead crane he'd operated for a decade failed its safety inspection. "Gotta suspend you pending investigation," Danny had said, avoiding eye contact. "Union rules. Full pay, but stay home until we figure out what's happening." Milo had nodded and collected his lunchbox without argument. 17 years of perfect safety records didn't disappear overnight. Someone wanted him gone from that job site, at least temporarily. The question was, why? Now, driving through the industrial district where empty warehouses cast long shadows, Milo began connecting dots he'd ignored for months. Leanne's sudden interest in their financial accounts, her insistence on putting both their names on everything, her casual questions about his pension and union benefits. The Riverside Hotel sat on a hill overlooking the Mahoning River. Expensive. The kind of place logistics executives took their wives for anniversaries, not the kind of place married women met their bosses for work discussions. Milo parked across the street under a broken streetlight and waited. He'd learned patience in the service, before the factory jobs, before marriage, when waiting meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. The rain continued, creating rivers on the windshield that made the hotel's warm windows look like watercolors. At 6:15 p.m., Leanne's silver Honda pulled into the hotel parking lot. She sat in the car for 2 minutes, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, then walked quickly to the lobby entrance. Her stride had purpose. This wasn't her first time here. 15 minutes later, Nathan Ellsworth's black BMW pulled up to the valet stand. Even from across the street, Milo recognized the confident walk, the expensive coat, the way other people moved aside when he passed. Nate commanded rooms the way Milo commanded welding torches, with practiced authority. Milo started his truck and drove home. He had work to do. The garage smelled like motor oil and metal shavings. Milo's workspace occupied half the space, organized with military precision. Every tool had its place. Every project had its timeline. On the workbench sat a surveillance camera drone that he and his friend Hal Bishop had built 2 summers ago, back when they thought retirement meant fishing and tinkering with electronics. Hal lived 3 blocks away in a house that had seen better decades. He answered his door wearing a bathrobe and holding a beer despite the early hour. "Milo, what's wrong? You look like someone kicked your dog. Need to borrow that drone we built. The one with the good camera." Hal studied his friend's face. They'd known each other since high school, had served in different branches, but the same war had stood up at each other's weddings. Hal's marriage had ended badly. Milo's was apparently heading the same direction. This about Leanne? This about truth? Hal disappeared into his cluttered living room and returned with a metal case. "Batteries charged. Memory cards empty." "You sure about this?" "I'm sure about nothing anymore. That's the problem." "Want backup?" "Want deniability. If this goes wrong, I did it alone. Hal handed over the case. You didn't get this from me. Milo drove back to the hotel district as darkness settled over the city. The drone launched silently from a public park 2 blocks away, its electric motors barely audible over the October wind. The camera's night vision turned the hotel's top floors into a green-tinted fishbowl, room 417. Milo made note of the number as he guided the drone close enough to confirm what he already knew. Through partially open curtains, he watched his wife of 12 years embrace another man with an intimacy that turned his stomach. The drone returned to his hands with 47 minutes of high-definition video. Enough evidence to destroy her in divorce court. Enough truth to shatter whatever was left of his faith in people? But Milo Greavy was a union man, trained to think in terms of strategy rather than emotion. Destroying Leanne would cost him half of everything he'd built. Destroying Nate Ellsworth might actually improve his position. He drove home through empty streets, past the factory where he'd been suspended, past the diner where he and Leanne used to eat breakfast on Sundays, past the future that was crumbling like the town's abandoned steel mills. Leanne's car sat in their driveway. The kitchen light was on. She looked up from her laptop when he entered, her expression carefully neutral. You're home early. Suspension, remember? Nothing but time these days. Right. I forgot. She closed the laptop. How are you handling it? One day at a time. How was your day? Busy. Nate has us working on a big contract with the State Transportation Department. Lots of late meetings. Milo poured himself coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table. The misdelivered envelope still lay where he'd left it, seemingly forgotten. Sounds important. It could change everything for the company. For us, I mean. More stability, better benefits. That's good news. Leanne smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I should shower. Long day. She left the kitchen and Milo heard water running upstairs. He opened her laptop. She'd never changed the password from their anniversary date and found exactly what he expected. Email drafts to Nate filled with intimacies and future plans. A real estate search for condos in Columbus. A research folder about asset protection during divorce proceedings. She'd been planning this for months. The equipment failures at his job site suddenly made sense. Nate's company provided logistics services to Peterson Fabrication. A few strategic delays, some misplaced maintenance schedules, and Milo would be out of work with reduced bargaining power in divorce negotiations. Milo closed the laptop and finished his coffee. The shower was still running upstairs. He walked to the garage and opened a metal filing cabinet that held 17 years of union paperwork, tax returns, and employment records. At the bottom, wrapped in plastic, was a life insurance policy that Leanne didn't know existed. His union provided basic coverage, but Milo had purchased additional protection years ago when they'd talked about having children. The conversation had never progressed beyond talking, but the policy had remained active. $500,000 payable to his estate if he died accidentally while employed in his trade. He replaced the policy and pulled out a different folder. Emergency contact information for every union member at Peterson Fabrication, including their private cell numbers. Milo had served as shop steward for 3 years. He knew which men owed favors, which ones needed work, which ones would keep their mouths shut for the right price. The shower stopped running. Milo heard Leanne moving around upstairs, probably checking her phone for messages from Nate. He walked back to the kitchen and sat down with a legal pad, sketching plans the way he'd learned to sketch weld patterns in technical school. By the time Leanne came downstairs in her bathrobe, Milo had filled 3 pages with detailed diagrams and contact names. She glanced at his work but didn't ask questions. They'd been strangers long enough that curiosity about each other's activities had died a natural death. I'm tired, she said. Think I'll read in bed. I'll be up later. Got some union business to sort out. She kissed his forehead with the mechanical affection of a business partner and disappeared upstairs. Milo heard the bedroom door close, followed by the soft sound of her phone buzzing with text messages. He picked up his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Hal Bishop's number. It's late, Hal answered. Need to talk. Can you come over? Give me 10 minutes. Hal arrived wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, carrying a thermos of coffee and a suspicious expression. They sat in the garage with the door closed, speaking in low voices. She's planning to leave me, Milo said without preamble. Found email drafts about lawyers and apartments in Columbus. They've been meeting at the Riverside Hotel for weeks. Crap. I'm sorry, brother. Don't be sorry yet. Be practical. You still got contacts from your security days? Hal had spent 2 years after the Army working private security for corporate executives who lived in fear of kidnapping or industrial espionage. He'd left that world when the paranoia started affecting his sleep, but he'd maintained relationships with people who specialized in information gathering. Depends what you need. Background check on Nathan Ellsworth. Financial records, legal troubles, anything that might give us leverage. That's not cheap. I've got money. Pension fund's been growing for 17 years. Hal studied his friend's face in the garage's fluorescent light. You planning something stupid? Planning something careful. Stupid would be confronting them directly. Careful means understanding the battlefield before the first move is made. What about evidence? You got proof of the affair? Milo tapped the drone case. 47 minutes of high-definition video, but that's not the tool. That's just ammunition. Then what's the tool? Time, planning, and the fact that they think I'm too stupid to figure it out. Hal poured coffee from his thermos and passed the cup to Milo. Tell me what you need. The next morning, Milo drove to downtown's legal district and found the office of Timothy Bedwell, the lawyer who handled union contract disputes. Tim was a thin man in his 50s who wore cheap suits and expensive glasses, known for his ability to find loopholes in corporate agreements. Milo heard about the suspension. Total nonsense, safety violations, if you ask me. That's why I'm here. Need advice about protecting assets during employment disputes? Tim leaned back in his chair. They trying to fire you? Don't know yet. But if they are, I want to make sure Leanne doesn't get hurt financially. It was a careful lie, designed to sound like a concerned husband rather than a man planning war. Tim spent an hour explaining emergency asset protection procedures available to union members facing termination. Ohio law allowed married workers to transfer certain assets to offshore accounts or family trusts if they could demonstrate imminent financial threat to their households. Paperwork takes about a week, Tim explained. But once it's filed, those assets are protected even if you lose your job or face other financial challenges. What kind of assets? Retirement accounts, savings, investment properties. Anything that's not specifically marital property. Milo had been saving money in accounts that Leanne didn't know about for years. Not because he was planning divorce, but because factory workers learned early to prepare for layoffs and economic downturns. That nest egg, combined with his union pension, totaled nearly $200,000. I'll need those forms, Milo said. That afternoon, he met Rebecca Armitage at a coffee shop near the university. Becca was Nate's ex-wife, a woman in her 40s who taught English at the community college and drank too much wine on weekends. Hal's security contact had provided her number along with a detailed background report on Nathan Ellsworth. Becca arrived wearing dark sunglasses and carrying a stack of graded papers. She looked like a woman who'd been beautiful before disappointment settled into the lines around her eyes. You must be Milo. Hal said you wanted to discuss Nate. That's right. I understand you were married to him for 8 years. 8 years too many. She ordered a double espresso and lit a cigarette despite the no smoking signs. What's your interest in my ex-husband? He's sleeping with my wife. Becca laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course he is. That man can't be faithful to a grocery list, much less a marriage. I need to understand him. His patterns, his weaknesses, his fears, planning revenge, planning justice. Becca studied Milo's face through her sunglasses. Nate's afraid of 3 things: losing money, losing status, and losing control. He cheated on me with his secretary, then with his accountant, then with a client's wife. Each time, he promised it would never happen again. Each time, he blamed someone else for tempting him. How did your divorce end? Badly. He hid assets, manipulated witnesses, convinced the judge that I was unstable because I'd started drinking after I found out about the cheating. I got almost nothing. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Nate's good at making people underestimate him, but he's terrible under pressure. Start applying pressure in the right places, and he'll make mistakes. Becca finished her coffee and stubbed out her cigarette. You seem like a decent man, Milo. Don't let him destroy you the way he destroyed me. She left without saying goodbye, and Milo sat alone with her words echoing in his head. Nate was good at making people underestimate him. The equipment failures at Peterson Fabrication suddenly seemed like more than coincidence. That evening, Milo called Danny Torres at home. Danny, it's Milo. Got a question about those equipment failures? Look, I can't discuss the investigation over the phone. Not asking about the investigation, asking about maintenance schedules. When was the last time Ellsworth Logistics delivered replacement parts to our shop? There was silence on the line. Finally, Danny sighed. Last month. Hydraulic components for the press you were using? Why? Just curious. Thanks, Danny. Milo hung up and walked to his garage workshop. On the wall hung a calendar where he marked important dates. Paydays, union meetings, Leanne's work schedule. He flipped back to September and found the date when Ellsworth Logistics had delivered parts to Peterson Fabrication. 3 days later, the hydraulic press had failed its first inspection in 6 years. Nate wasn't just sleeping with Milo's wife. He was systematically destroying Milo's employment to improve his leverage in the inevitable divorce proceedings. The equipment failures weren't accidents. They were sabotage. Milo picked up his phone and called Hal. "Time to escalate," he said when Hal answered. "What do you need?" "Remember that warehouse where we used to work on the drone, the abandoned place out on River Road? What about it? Still got the key?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Because we're going to set a trap." The warehouse had been empty for 3 years, since Consolidated Manufacturing moved their operations to Mexico. Hal had worked security there during the transition, and he'd kept a key when the property management company forgot to collect it. The building was perfect for Milo's purposes, isolated, accessible, and equipped with electrical systems that could be modified without attracting attention. More importantly, it had a legitimate reason for Nate to visit. Milo spent 2 days researching property records and zoning laws. The warehouse sat on 12 acres of industrial land that had been rezoned for mixed commercial use. With the right permits, it could be converted into anything from artist studios to event venues. On Thursday morning, Milo called Ellsworth Logistics and asked to speak with Nate directly. "Mr. Ellsworth, this is Milo Greavy. I'm married to Leanne, your executive assistant." "Of course. Milo, how are you? Leanne speaks of you often." The lie came so smoothly that Milo almost admired its construction. "I'm fine, thanks." "Listen, I have a business proposition that might interest you. Real estate investment opportunity." "I'm listening." "There's a warehouse property out on River Road that's been rezoned for commercial development. Previous owner died, estate's looking to sell fast. I'm thinking it could be converted into event space, maybe studios for artists. Leanne mentioned you have experience with property development. That's intriguing. What's the timeline?" "Estate wants offers by next week. I was hoping you and Leanne could take a look at it with me. Saturday afternoon, maybe? I've got keys from the real estate agent." There was pause while Nate consulted his calendar. "Saturday works. What time?" 3 o'clock. I'll meet you both there." "Excellent. Send me the address." Milo provided directions and hung up. Then he called Leanne at work. "Honey, I've got exciting news. Remember that business idea I mentioned about buying property for renovation? I found a place, and Nate's agreed to look at it with us on Saturday." "Nate? Why Nate?" "He's got experience with commercial real estate. I thought he could give us professional advice." Leanne was quiet for a moment. "I don't think mixing business with personal relationships is a good idea. Come on, Leanne, we could use the expert opinion. Besides, it would be good for you to see me taking initiative with investments, right?" She agreed reluctantly, and Milo smiled as he hung up. The trap was set. Friday night, Milo and Hal worked until dawn preparing the warehouse. They installed motion-activated cameras in 6 locations, hidden inside old electrical boxes and ventilation grates. They rigged the main electrical panel with remote switches that could cut power to specific sections of the building. Most importantly, they prepared what Hal called the insurance policy. "You sure about this?" Hal asked as they tested the detonation system for the 3rd time. "Sure about the electronics, sure about the timing, sure about the necessity. And if something goes wrong, then we deny everything and act surprised when the police ask questions." The explosive device was simple, a small charge hidden inside an old transformer box connected to a remote trigger. With a range of 200 yards, the explosion would be loud enough to be heard across the industrial district, but small enough to cause property damage rather than personal injury. Milo had learned demolition techniques during his army service, back when removing obstacles was part of the job description. The charge was designed to simulate an electrical fire that got out of control, the kind of accident that happened in abandoned buildings where copper thieves and homeless people sometimes started fires for warmth. Saturday arrived gray and cold with the smell of rain in the air. Milo drove to the warehouse an hour early and positioned himself in a delivery truck that Hal had borrowed from his current employer. The truck sat behind a cluster of trees 300 yards from the warehouse entrance, with clear sight lines to the building and the access road. At 2:45 p.m., Leanne's silver Honda appeared on River Road, followed by Nate's black BMW. They parked near the warehouse's main entrance, and Milo watched through binoculars as they waited for him to arrive. He let them wait 15 minutes before calling Leanne's cell phone. "I'm running late," he told her. "Had to stop for gas. Go ahead and look around outside. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Through the binoculars, he watched Leanne relay this message to Nate. They walked around the building's perimeter, pointing at architectural features and discussing renovation possibilities. To anyone watching, they looked like potential business partners evaluating an investment opportunity. But Milo noticed other details. The way Nate's hand touched the small of Leanne's back, the way she leaned close to hear his whispered comments, the way they moved together with practiced intimacy. At exactly 3:15 p.m., Milo triggered the explosive device. The blast echoed across the industrial district like thunder, followed by the crash of falling debris and the hiss of escaping steam from ruptured pipes. A column of smoke rose from the warehouse's electrical room, and within minutes, the building's fire suppression system activated. Milo watched Leanne and Nate run to their cars, then drive away in opposite directions without stopping to investigate the explosion or check for casualties. Their panic told him everything he needed to know about their priorities. He waited until the first fire truck arrived, then called Leanne's cell phone. "Jesus Christ, what happened?" he shouted into the phone. "I just got to River Road and there's fire trucks everywhere. The warehouse exploded." Leanne's voice was shaky. "We were walking around outside when something blew up inside the building. Nate and I got out of there as fast as we could. Are you hurt?" "No, we're fine. But Milo, that was terrifying. What if we'd been inside when it happened?" "Thank God you weren't." "Where are you now?" "Driving home." Nate went back to his office to call his insurance company. He's worried about liability since we were on the property. Milo drove home through back roads, avoiding the emergency vehicles that were still responding to the warehouse fire. By the time he arrived, Leanne was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, looking genuinely shaken. "That was the scariest thing I've ever experienced," she said. "One minute we're discussing renovation costs. The next minute, the whole building's exploding." "Old electrical systems," Milo said. "That's why those places sit empty for years. Too expensive to bring them up to code." He made coffee and sat across from her, playing the role of concerned husband. "I'm sorry I suggested looking at that place. Should have done more research first. It's not your fault. These things happen." But over the following days, Milo noticed changes in Leanne's behavior. She checked her phone more frequently. She worked later at the office. She seemed distracted during conversations, as if part of her attention was always elsewhere. More importantly, she began asking casual questions about their finances. How much money did he have in his union pension? What would happen to their house if he lost his job permanently? Had he considered what they would do if Peterson Fabrication closed down entirely? Milo answered these questions with deliberate vagueness, portraying himself as a man too focused on day-to-day survival to think strategically about long-term planning. He let her believe that he was financially vulnerable and emotionally dependent on their relationship. Meanwhile, he continued his own preparations. Tim Bedwell filed the paperwork to protect Milo's hidden assets, creating a legal barrier that would prevent those funds from being divided in divorce proceedings. Hal's security contact provided updated reports on Nate's business activities, revealing a pattern of corner cutting and regulatory violations that could be used as leverage. Most importantly, Milo began building relationships with people who owed Nate money or had grievances against Ellsworth Logistics. The business world was smaller than most people realized, especially in a declining industrial town where everyone knew everyone else's secrets. 3 weeks after the warehouse explosion, Milo received a phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Greavy, this is Detective Rennie Malik with the City Police. I'd like to ask you some questions about the incident on River Road." Detective Malik was a chain-smoking woman in her 50s who transferred from Columbus after an armed incident that ended her prospects for promotion. She had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many crimes that were almost impossible to prove in court. They met at a diner downtown, where Malik ordered black coffee and studied Milo with professional interest. "Tell me about your relationship with Nathan Ellsworth," she said without preamble. "He's my wife's boss. Don't know him personally. But You were planning to do business with him. Was hoping to get his advice about a real estate investment. Guy's got experience with commercial properties. Malik lit a cigarette and blew smoke toward the ceiling. Funny thing about that warehouse explosion. Fire department says it was caused by an electrical malfunction, but the insurance company's not so sure. What do you mean? Mean they found traces of accelerant in the debris. Not enough to prove arson, but enough to make them nervous about paying claims. Milo kept his expression neutral. That's weird. Very weird, especially since the building's been empty for 3 years. Makes you wonder who would want to blow up an abandoned warehouse and why they'd pick that particular day to do it. Any theories? Few theories. None I can prove yet. Malik studied Milo's face through her cigarette smoke. You know what I think, Mr. Greavy? I think someone wanted to send a message. Question is, what was the message and who was supposed to receive it? I wouldn't know about that. No, I don't suppose you would. Malik stubbed out her cigarette. But if you hear anything interesting, you'll let me know, right? After the detective left, Milo sat in the diner for another hour, thinking through the implications of her visit. The police suspected sabotage, but they couldn't prove it. More importantly, they didn't seem to be looking at him as a primary suspect. That evening, he called Rebecca Armitage. Becca, it's Milo. We met at the coffee shop a few weeks ago. I remember. What's wrong? You sound stressed. Need another favor, information about Nate's business practices, specifically whether he's ever been investigated for fraud or regulatory violations. There was silence on the line. Finally, Becca sighed. Why do you ask? Because I think he's been sabotaging my job to improve his position in a divorce that he and my wife are planning. Jesus, you're sure about this? Sure enough, to risk everything on it. Becca was quiet for a long moment. Meet me tomorrow night, same coffee shop. Bring a notebook. The next evening, Becca arrived carrying a manila folder thick with documents. She looked like a woman who'd been drinking before their meeting, but her voice was steady as she spread papers across the table. Nate's company has been under investigation by the State Transportation Department for 18 months, she said. Overcharging on contracts, using substandard materials, falsifying inspection reports. Nothing they can prosecute yet, but enough red flags to make auditors nervous. How do you know this? Because I still have friends in the state government. People who remember when Nate and I were married, people who never liked him but had to do business with him anyway. She handed Milo a stack of photocopied documents. Contract violations, safety complaints, whistleblower reports from former employees. Nate's been walking a tightrope for years using political connections to avoid serious consequences. What would happen if this information became public? His company would lose its state contracts overnight. He'd be bankrupt within 6 months. Milo studied the documents, recognizing some of the project names from conversations he'd overheard between Leanne and her coworkers. Why are you giving me this? Because Nate destroyed my life, and I want to watch him lose everything the way I lost everything. Becca's voice was bitter with old anger. Besides, your wife's planning to leave you for a man who's going to be unemployed very soon. She just doesn't know it yet. That night, Milo made photocopies of Becca's documents and began cross-referencing them with information from Hal's security contact. The pattern that emerged was unmistakable. Ellsworth Logistics had been systematically defrauding state contracts while using political influence to avoid oversight. More importantly, several of the contracts involved Peterson Fabrication as a subcontractor. If Nate's company lost its state certification, Peterson would lose those contracts as well, potentially triggering layoffs that would affect Milo's job security. The irony was perfect. Nate was destroying his own future while trying to manipulate Milo's present. But Milo needed more than documents to build his case. He needed witnesses, recorded conversations, evidence that would stand up in court. Most importantly, he needed to force Nate and Leanne into making mistakes that would expose their plans. The opportunity came 2 weeks later when Leanne announced that she would be working late again. Big presentation tomorrow, she explained. Nate wants the whole team to stay until we get it right. What kind of presentation? New contract proposal for the State Highway Department. Could be worth millions if we get it. Milo nodded sympathetically and wished her luck. Then he waited until she left for work and called Hal. Time for phase 2, he said. What do you need? Need you to make some phone calls. Anonymous tips to the state auditor's office about contract irregularities at Ellsworth Logistics. That's dangerous territory, brother. More dangerous to do nothing. If Nate gets that highway contract, he'll have enough political protection to survive any investigation. We need to strike while he's vulnerable. Hal made the calls from a payphone outside a gas station in the next county, using a voice modulator that he'd built for their drone experiments. He reported suspected fraud in highway construction contracts, providing just enough detail to trigger an official investigation without revealing how he'd obtained the information. 3 days later, state auditors arrived at Ellsworth Logistics without warning. Milo learned about the audit from Danny Torres, who heard about it from the purchasing manager at Peterson Fabrication. They're going through every contract Ellsworth has with the state, Danny explained, looking for irregularities, safety violations, anything that might indicate fraud. Think they'll find anything? Brother, they always find something when they look that hard. That evening, Leanne came home 2 hours later than usual, looking exhausted and worried. Rough day? Milo asked. The worst. State auditors showed up this morning and started demanding documents going back 3 years. Nate's been in meetings with lawyers all day. That sounds serious. It is serious. If they find anything wrong, the company could lose its state contracts. That's 60% of our business. Milo made appropriate noises of concern while internally celebrating. The trap was closing exactly as he'd planned. Over the following week, Leanne's stress levels increased dramatically. She worked 12-hour days, came home exhausted, and spent her evenings on phone calls with lawyers and accountants. Her conversations with Nate became terse and professional, focused on damage control rather than romantic planning. More importantly, she stopped asking questions about Milo's finances. The woman who'd been planning to divorce her husband for a richer man suddenly found herself wondering if her rich man would still be rich when the auditors finished their work. Milo watched this transformation with satisfaction. Leanne had always been attracted to security and status. When those things became uncertain, her commitment wavered. But Nate wasn't finished fighting. On a Thursday evening in late November, he called Milo directly. Milo, we need to talk. Man to man. About what? About the future, about business opportunities, about making sure everyone gets what they deserve. They arranged to meet at a bar downtown, neutral territory where they could speak privately. Milo arrived early and chose a table near the back, where conversations couldn't be overheard by other patrons. Nate arrived wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the stress lines around his eyes. He ordered whiskey neat and got straight to the point. I know you know, he said. Know what? About Leanne and me. About our relationship. Milo sipped his beer and studied Nate's face. What relationship? Don't play stupid, Milo. It doesn't suit you. Nate leaned forward. Look, this doesn't have to be ugly. Leanne and I care about each other, but we also care about you. We want everyone to come out of this situation in good shape. What situation? The divorce. The asset division. The transition to new living arrangements. Milo set down his beer and looked directly into Nate's eyes. Who said anything about divorce? Come on, Milo. You're not happy. Leanne's not happy. Why drag this out when we could handle it like civilized adults? Maybe because I love my wife and I'm not interested in giving her up to another man. Nate's composure cracked slightly. This isn't about giving her up. This is about accepting reality. Leanne's made her choice. The question is whether you're going to fight it or work with us to make the transition as painless as possible. What kind of transition? Financial settlement. You keep the house, your pension, your union benefits. Leanne keeps her job and her freedom to make new choices. Everyone wins. Milo pretended to consider this offer. What about your audit problems? Heard the state's looking pretty hard at your company's contracts. Nate's face hardened. That's temporary. Political theater. Will be cleared within a month. And if you're not cleared, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Milo, this conversation isn't about my business problems. It's about your marriage problems. Maybe they're connected. What do you mean? Milo leaned back in his chair. Maybe a man who's willing to sabotage another man's job to steal his wife isn't the kind of man who deserves to keep his own job. The color drained from Nate's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Equipment failures at Peterson Fabrication. Mysterious problems with machinery that worked fine until your company delivered replacement parts. Funny how those failures happened right when you needed me out of the way. You're paranoid. Am I? Or am I just paying attention? Milo finished his beer and stood up. Here's what's going to happen, Nate. You're going to leave my wife alone. You're going to focus on surviving your audit. And you're going to pray that I don't decide to share what I know with the wrong people. You don't know anything. I know enough. Milo dropped a 20 on the table. Enjoy your whiskey. Might be the last expensive drink you buy for a while. He left Nate sitting alone at the table and drove home through the November darkness. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned. Nate was rattled, defensive, and beginning to make the kind of mistakes that desperate men always made. Leanne was asleep when he arrived home, but her laptop was open on the kitchen counter. Milo found draft emails that confirmed his suspicions. She and Nate were planning to delay their escape until after the audit concluded. They were hoping his company would survive the investigation, but preparing contingency plans in case it didn't. One email, addressed to a divorce attorney in Columbus, outlined a strategy for claiming emotional abandonment and financial neglect. Leanne was planning to portray herself as the victim of a husband who cared more about his job than his family. Another email, this one to a real estate agent, inquired about rental properties in Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Backup plans for a backup plan. Milo closed the laptop and walked to his workshop. On the wall hung a calendar where he'd been marking important dates: audit deadlines, contract renewal dates, union meeting schedules. Everything was falling into place according to his timeline. The next morning brought news that accelerated his plans. Danny Torres called with an update from Peterson Fabrications' front office. State auditors found irregularities in 3 major contracts, Danny reported. Ellsworth Logistics is being suspended from all state work pending further investigation. How long will that take? Could be months, could be years. Depends what else they find. Milo thanked Danny and immediately called Tim Bedwell, the union lawyer. Tim, remember those asset protection forms we filed? I need to activate them. What's the emergency? Peterson's about to lose its biggest contracts. Layoffs are coming, and I want my finances protected before the divorce proceedings start. Tim spent an hour on the phone with various state agencies, activating the legal protections that would shield Milo's hidden assets from division in divorce. Court. By noon, nearly $200,000 had been transferred to accounts that Leanne couldn't touch. That evening, she came home looking defeated. Nate's company lost its state contracts, she announced without preamble. That's terrible. What does it mean for your job? I don't know yet. He's meeting with lawyers tomorrow to discuss options. Milo made sympathetic noises while internally calculating how long Ellsworth Logistics could survive without its primary revenue source. Based on the financial documents that Becca had provided, the company had less than 6 months of operating capital. I'm sure it'll work out, he told Leanne. Nate seems like a smart businessman. She looked at him strangely. Since when do you have opinions about Nate's business skills? Since you started talking about him every day for the past 6 months. The comment hit its target. Leanne's face flushed, and she turned away to pour herself wine. He's my boss. Of course I talk about work. Of course. That weekend, Milo put the final pieces of his plan into motion. He called Rebecca Armitage and arranged to meet her at a restaurant outside the city, where they were unlikely to encounter anyone who knew either of them. I need you to make a phone call, he told her. What kind of call? Anonymous tip to the state attorney general's office. Information about Ellsworth Logistics contract violations that might interest federal investigators. Becca stared at him across the table. You want to escalate this to federal charges? Want to make sure Nate doesn't have time to cover his tracks or destroy evidence? That could send him to prison. That's the idea. She was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. What about Leanne? She works for him. If the company gets raided by federal agents, she could be questioned as a potential witness. She could also be charged as an accessory if they find evidence that she knew about the fraud. Did she know? She processed invoices, managed contracts, scheduled meetings with state officials. If there was fraud happening, she was involved whether she understood it or not. Becca made the call from a payphone in the restaurant's parking lot using the same voice modulator that Hal had used for his earlier tips. She reported suspected federal contract violations and money laundering, providing enough specific details to trigger an FBI investigation. Within a week, federal agents raided Ellsworth Logistics. Milo learned about the raid from a news report on the local television station. Armed agents had seized computers, files, and financial records. 3 employees, including Nathan Ellsworth, had been arrested on charges of conspiracy to defraud the federal government. Leanne called him from work, her voice shaking with panic. "Milo, you need to come get me. The FBI is here. They're arresting people. I think I'm going to be questioned." "Stay calm. Don't answer any questions without a lawyer present." "I can't afford a lawyer. I'll figure something out. Just don't say anything until I get there." Milo drove to Ellsworth Logistics and found the parking lot filled with federal vehicles. Leanne stood near her car, surrounded by agents who were asking questions about her role in the company's operations. "That's my wife," Milo told the lead agent. "She's not answering any questions without legal representation." The agent, a thin man in his 40s, studied Milo with professional interest. "Mr. Greavy, we'd like to ask you some questions as well." "About what?" "About your relationship with Nathan Ellsworth. About any business dealings you might have had with his company." Milo's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't have any business dealings with Ellsworth Logistics. My wife works there, but I'm just a factory worker." "What about the warehouse on River Road? The one that exploded while you were supposed to meet Mr. Ellsworth there?" "That was a coincidence. Bad timing." The agent handed Milo a business card. "We'll be in touch." "In the meantime, your wife is free to go, but she shouldn't leave the state without notifying us." During the drive home, Leanne sat in silence, staring out the window at the gray December landscape. Finally, she spoke. "They know about Nate and me." "What do you mean?" "One of the agents asked if I was having an extramarital relationship with my boss. They have photos, Milo. Surveillance photos from the hotel." Milo felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. The FBI investigation was even more thorough than he'd hoped. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing." "But they know. Knowing and proving are different things. Not when they have photographs." That night, Leanne packed a suitcase and moved into her sister's apartment across town. She claimed she needed space to think, but Milo knew she was preparing for the inevitable divorce proceedings. With Nate facing federal charges and her own legal troubles mounting, she could no longer afford to wait for a better opportunity. The divorce papers arrived 3 days before Christmas. Milo read them carefully, noting that Leanne was asking for half of everything: the house, his pension, his savings, his union benefits. She was also claiming emotional distress and requesting alimony based on her reduced earning capacity due to the trauma of being investigated by federal agents. He called Tim Bedwell immediately. "She's asking for assets that don't exist anymore," Tim said after reviewing the documents. "The emergency protections we filed mean she can't touch your pension or your protected savings." "What about the house?" "That's still marital property." But given her legal troubles, a judge might not be sympathetic to her financial demands. "What legal troubles?" "Haven't you heard? The FBI filed additional charges yesterday: conspiracy, money laundering, tax evasion." Leanne's named as a potential co-conspirator based on her access to financial records. Milo hung up and walked to his workshop, where he'd been building a sculpture from scrap metal. The piece was taking shape slowly, like everything else in his life. A crown made from broken steel, welded together with the kind of precision that only came from years of practice. The sculpture was nearly finished, like his revenge. 3 months later, the federal trials began. Nathan Ellsworth was convicted on 7 counts of fraud and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. His company's assets were seized to pay restitution to the government. His house, his cars, his business reputation, everything disappeared into the legal system's machinery. Leanne avoided prison by cooperating with prosecutors, but her testimony destroyed what remained of her credibility. She admitted to processing false invoices, scheduling meetings that she knew involved fraudulent activities, and maintaining personal relationships that compromised her professional judgment. The divorce proceedings took 6 weeks. Leanne's lawyer argued that she deserved half of Milo's assets because she had been an unwitting victim of her employer's criminal activities. Milo's lawyer argued that she had been a willing participant in a conspiracy that included adultery, fraud, and attempted manipulation of her husband's employment status. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had presided over financial crimes for 20 years, listened to both arguments with visible skepticism. "Mrs. Greavy, the judge said during the final hearing. You're asking this court to reward you for destroying your marriage while participating in activities that defrauded the taxpayers of the state. That's not how divorce law works. Leanne received no alimony, no pension rights, and no claim to Milo's protected assets. She kept her car and her personal belongings. Everything else stayed with Milo. But the legal victory was only the beginning of his satisfaction. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Milo used his protected savings to purchase the assets of Ellsworth Logistics at a federal auction. The company's client list, equipment, and remaining contracts sold for 30 cents on the dollar. He renamed the business Greevy Industrial Services and hired 3 former Peterson fabrication workers who had been laid off when the company lost its state contracts. Within a year, they had rebuilt the client base and secured new contracts with municipal governments across Ohio. Leanne found work as a receptionist at a law firm in Columbus, making less money than she'd earned as Nate's assistant. She lived in a studio apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda that needed constant repairs. Nate served his full sentence and was released to a halfway house in Cincinnati. His federal conviction made him unemployable in the logistics industry. Last anyone heard, he was working as a night security guard at a warehouse, making $12 an hour. On a cold February evening, exactly 2 years after the warehouse explosion, Milo sat in his workshop putting the finishing touches on his steel crown sculpture. The piece was ready for its final element, a small bronze plaque that he'd had engraved at a trophy shop. The plaque read, "Granted." Hal arrived with a 6-pack of beer and surveyed the completed sculpture. "Looks good," he said. "What are you going to do with it?" "Display it in the lobby of my company." Reminder that sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. You ever have regrets about any of this? Milo considered the question while polishing the crown's surface with a wire brush. Regret that I trusted people who didn't deserve trust. Regret that I waited so long to see what was obvious. But regret the outcome? No. Think they learned anything? Think they learned that actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences take time to arrive, but they always arrive. They drank beer in comfortable silence while snow fell outside the workshop windows. In the distance, the lights of Peterson Fabrication glowed against the winter sky. The plant was hiring again thanks to new state contracts that Greevy Industrial Services had helped secure. Milo's phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Rennie Malik. "Warehouse case officially closed. Electrical fire caused by faulty wiring. Thought you'd want to know." He deleted the message and finished his beer. Some cases closed because investigators found answers. Others closed because investigators ran out of questions worth asking. The important thing was knowing which category you fell into. 3 weeks later, Milo received an unexpected visitor at his office. Leanne stood in the lobby of Greevy Industrial Services, wearing a cheap business suit and looking older than her 37 years. "Hello, Milo." "Leanne, what brings you here?" "Wanted to see what you've built." "Wanted to congratulate you on your success." She studied the steel crown sculpture that dominated the lobby, reading the bronze plaque with an expression that might have been admiration or resignation. "Granted," she read aloud. "Clever. Seemed appropriate." "I suppose it did." She turned to face him. "I also wanted to apologize." "For what specifically?" "For underestimating you. For thinking I was smarter than you were. For believing that you would just accept whatever happened and move on." Milo studied her face, looking for signs of the woman he'd married 12 years ago. She was still there, but worn down by consequences she'd never seen coming. "Apology accepted," he said. "Is that it? No anger? No lecture about justice and karma? What would be the point? You're living with the consequences of your choices. I'm living with the consequences of mine." "That seems fair." Leanne nodded and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. "For what it's worth, Milo, I think you're a better man than I deserve to have been married to." "You're probably right about that." After she left, Milo returned to his office and pulled up the financial reports for Greevy Industrial Services. The company was profitable, growing, and positioned to benefit from the state's new infrastructure spending. In 6 months, he would have enough capital to purchase the Peterson fabrication plant when it came up for sale. Sometimes justice arrived through courtrooms and federal investigations. Sometimes it arrived through careful planning and patient execution. Sometimes it arrived because people who thought they were smarter than everyone else made the kind of mistakes that smart people never made. Milo Greevy had learned to appreciate all 3 varieties. That evening, he drove home to his house on Dalton Road, past the factory where he'd once worked night shifts, past the diner where he and Leanne had once eaten Sunday breakfast, past the future that had been rebuilt from the wreckage of betrayal. The house felt different now that he lived there alone. Cleaner, quieter, more honest. He made dinner and sat at the kitchen table with financial documents and architectural plans for the new facility he was planning to build. The work was satisfying in a way that union jobs had never been. Every decision was his. Every success belonged to him. Every risk was calculated and accepted on his own terms. Outside, snow continued to fall on the empty streets of a town that was slowly learning to rebuild itself. Some buildings would be torn down and replaced. Others would be renovated and repurposed. A few would be abandoned to time and weather. But the best ones, the ones built with quality materials and careful craftsmanship, would endure everything that came after. Milo finished his paperwork and walked to the garage workshop where he kept his welding equipment. On the workbench sat a new project, a steel memorial plaque for the Union Hall, honoring workers who had died in industrial accidents over the past century. The work required precision, patience, and respect for the materials being shaped. Exactly the skills that had served him well in other endeavors. He lit the torch and began to work, creating something permanent from raw steel and careful heat. Outside, the snow fell steadily, covering the old roads with promises of new beginnings. In the morning, there would be more work to do, more plans to execute, more futures to build from the ashes of the past. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of his workshop, Milo Greavy was exactly where he belonged, creating something better from something broken, one perfect weld at a time. The torch flame cast dancing shadows on the wall, and somewhere in those shadows, Justice smiled with satisfaction at a job well done.